Hey, this is Trey. Just doing a quick video on the new 1.2 update for cinematic film looks for Skyrim SE. In this update, I've added quite a few new looks to the preset, namely everything under the CG prefix here and everything under the MF prefix. Just a quick explanation as to what those letters mean. CG stands for cinematic grade, or color grade, however you want to look at it. And this is basically just the section where I stick looks that are just generic color grading, not necessarily trying to look like film stock. And here's the modern film stock section, where these are in fact emulations of modern day movie film. And then the vintage film section, which obviously is for older film stocks and classic movie film types. So just going through them really quickly. Let's move this over here. So yeah, oops. Okay, there we go. You got Apocalypse, Blockbuster Cold, Earth and Cold, Felt, Furious, Hampton, Warsaw, Fujifilm Reala 500D, Kodak 5219, Kodak 5229, and Tetrachrome rounding out the new presets. There are 19 in total now. Also, in addition, this update brings a letterbox ratio adjustment. So you can now set the letterbox all the way up to pretty intense here, all the way down to nothing. But that's a little redundant. There's also a toggle to just turn it off completely. Listed under here are, on the left, the ENB values for this ratio here, the actual aspect ratio that gives you, and the Hollywood name for that aspect ratio. Now this field of view section here in the middle, the way this works is this is a recommended value. You don't have to do this. It's a recommended value that you should add to the field of view that you normally play at if you're not using Letterbox. So for me, I generally play at an 85 field of view. Okay, that's without letterbox. If I turn on setting the value for the 2:3:5 aspect ratio, if I turn that on, then this is telling me I should add 5 to my preferred field of view, which is 85. So let's go to 90. And what that does is that opens up obviously the field of view, but it makes the crop feel a little less cramped. And to make that more apparent, let's go back to my preferred field of view of 85, and let's crank all the way up to a crazy wide 2.76 aspect ratio. Okay, you can see that's crazy. Now, right now, the 85 field of view feels a bit cramped to me. So let's go ahead and set that to 85 plus 9, which comes to 94. And you can see that opened the image up very nicely. And even though the aspect ratio is extremely wide, that field of view looks quite natural. In fact, we're almost at 100 field of view. That if I turn off letterbox, that looks really distorted and awful. But with the letterbox on, you can get away with wider fields of view. And in fact, you can turn this up a lot more if you like the effect on wider fields of view. So if you look here, this is really, really blurred out, especially looking at that barrel there. The higher lens aberration values are useful in the vintage presets, like, for example, Technicolor 4. A lot of the older films, they used anamorphic lenses, and they tended to distort pretty badly on the edges. And a wider field of view allows you to push this a lot harder if you want to. In fact, this is the max. I could bump that up more, but honestly I think it looks a little ridiculous beyond 0.3, so I just set that as the max. Let's turn off the letterbox. And you can see here, for example, the color fringing is really awful in the corners, especially over here. This is unacceptable. There's no way I'd want to play with that. But with the letterbox on, it's not quite as bad in the center of the screen, and those really horrible artifacts are mostly covered up. So pushing your aspect ratio up really far allows you to push some of the effects further. In fact, you could actually push this up a little bit more too, and kind of get away with it because of the wider aspect ratio. You push the grain all the way up. Something else that I feel like I should probably address here. All of these looks are going to have very different contrasts to them because I'm not just shifting color around here, I'm actually adjusting contrast curves and everything else in them. So naturally they're all going to look different. If you find one that you like the color but you're not really liking the contrast of it, for example, I don't think that it's overexposed, but someone else may think it's overexposed. You can darken the image a bit here by pushing down on exposure. And the interesting thing about this is, even though you would assume just by the way that this is stacked up that the order of effects starts here and then works its way down, but in actuality it starts with lens, then goes to camera, and then sharpening, and then to film stock, and then image format, which makes sense. The image format is last because it overlays over the top of everything, but film stock is right behind image format. So what that means is any adjustments that you make here happen before you get to the film emulation in here, which is what you select here. So when you're adjusting this, it is as if you are adjusting the exposure of an actual camera as far as these film emulations are concerned. And you can see we pushed the exposure down a lot, and now we have a very underexposed image. Interesting way to look at that is, for example, here, the TreyX 400 preset, which is a black and white. Let's say we wanted a higher contrast look. You can really push contrast pretty hard in black and white film. So let's push exposure up quite a bit, and let's push the gamma. Gamma is actually midtones, and it kind of works in reverse the way you would think. Pushing the number up will darken the midtones, and pulling the number backwards will lift them. So, you know, right now we've lost a ton of saturation, and in fact that looks very overexposed. So what you would then do is, you know, it's kind of a give and take. So let's push that really, really hard. And you can see we got away with quite a bit there. And there's still, you know, you can still see some shadow detail in the bushes here. It's really cool what you can do with some of these things in real time. The ability to do all this in real time is really nice. Reshade 3 just came out, but it's not as full-featured as far as shader support as previous versions of Reshade. And so it's really nice to use ENB to have full control over all of these effects in real time. So let's put this back to default. Oops.
I work for Bellathor at the general goods store.
Something else that I want to go over is, let's head over to Apocalypse. Okay, so you can see that this is a very warm preset. Well, you could make it look a little different by just pulling the color temperature down and making the color temperature cooler. If I turn the mix level all the way off, which is basically getting rid of that film effect altogether, when we do that, we can really see what the temperature control is doing. This is just the straight image with no film effect because we turn the mix level all the way down. You can make the image warmer. or you can make the image colder. So these three settings here, the camera settings, are very powerful effects. So let's pull up Hampton, pull the next level all the way up. Let's warm it up. It's really interesting the effects that you can get by warming or cooling. In fact, warming this up, you get a very nice color separation of the goodness, sorry for that noise, that's my controller kind of freaking out. But you get a nice separation of the stone wall to the sky here. If I cool it down, everything starts to look blue.
Don't mean to be
But there's a lot of things to play with, and you can make the game look how you want. Warsaw's a nice preset. It drains a lot of the color out, just basically leaving skin tones and red shades. So if I want to warm that up, once again, it brings a nice tone to the stone color. And if I make it colder, everything starts to take on a blue hue. Let's go to Earth and Cold, which the reason I named it Earth and Cold is because the shadow areas feel really nice and earthy, brownish, but the rest of the image feels kind of cold. So let's warm the whole thing up. And suddenly it no longer feels cold at all. It feels, very warm. But if I push the blue, now it almost loses that whole earthen feeling. In fact, if you watch the shadows here, they're quite blue. But as I lift the temperature back up into its normal area, you can see them take on their brown color again. So changing these three settings here, can drastically affect the way that the film emulation reacts. Faded Fuji. This is a nice preset. Warm, cold. In fact, since this is actually a quite faded preset, let's go over to like some shadow areas here. Something that's kind of in deep shadow, if I can find something here in Whiterun. I guess over here. Yeah, take a look at the shadows in the rock here. Now, what's interesting is that Faded Fuji is lifting. It's lifting the black levels quite a bit. In fact, as I pull that down, you can see the shadows darken. And as I turn the mix level up, you can see it lifts the shadows up. So, as I push the midtones harder, which will increase contrast, those shadows start to get crushed. So I lift exposure up a lot. Now the end result of this is going to be a really harsh image, and the sky is going to be totally blown out. But what's interesting is that, let me find the sun. Yeah, it's right there. That's pure white. What's interesting is that when I toggle the preset on and off, actually, let's try a different film preset to demonstrate this. Let's try, yeah, Apocalypse. Even though I'm pushing the image really hard, the brightest levels on this particular preset are darker than the solid white. And that's basically demonstrating that, goodness, that looks really awful. That's demonstrating that no matter what you do in this section, the color output is still going to be limited by this. So you can push this to actually really drive the colors here. And it's a very interactive experience. Anyway, I rambled quite a bit, but hopefully this gave you further insight into how to use the Cinematic Film Looks ENB for Skyrim Special Edition. And if you play Fallout 4, be on the lookout for basically the same thing to come to Fallout 4. I'm probably going to be taking the three different mods that I have there, the Cinematic, Modern, and Vintage Film Looks collections, and probably dump them all into one ENB the same as this. Probably just going to call it Fallout Film Looks. But yeah, something similar will be hitting Fallout 4 in the next few days. Anyway, hope you guys enjoy this preset, and I'll catch you in the next video.